The rain was coming down in cold, slanted sheets the morning Elena Sloane stepped out of a black luxury car and into the back alley of her own company headquarters wearing a faded delivery jacket, a cheap cap, and scuffed sneakers. By the time she reached the service entrance with 2 cardboard food boxes in her hands, she looked less like the billionaire founder of Sloane Digital and more like a woman who had spent the night working double shifts just to keep the lights on. That was exactly the point. Elena had not come to test the food service. She had not come to inspect the building. She had come because anonymous complaints had reached her desk for weeks. Complaints about cruelty, humiliation, and a culture inside her company that had become colder than the glass towers she had built. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for what she was about to hear behind a half-open conference room door. Before we go any further, if you believe kindness still matters, if you believe people deserve second chances, and that no one should be judged by their hardest season in life, please take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that stay with your heart long after they end. Elena had built Sloane Digital from a cramped apartment with secondhand furniture and a laptop that overheated every hour. She knew what it meant to struggle. What most of her polished executives didn't know was that before the success, before the magazine covers and private board meetings, there had been nights when Elena's mother worked until midnight cleaning offices while she sat in the corner doing homework under fluorescent lights. She remembered the smell of industrial soap, the ache in her mother's hands, and the way people walked past her as if she were part of the furniture. She had promised herself then that if she ever built something, she would build a company where people were treated with dignity. But success had a way of creating distance, and distance had a way of hiding ugly truths. Inside the building, she kept her head down and moved like any delivery driver would. Employees passed her without a second glance. Some didn't hold the elevator. Some didn't even look at her face. On the 12th floor, she followed the order slip to a glass conference room where a strategy meeting was underway. Through the opening in the door, she saw a young man arranging lunch trays with careful hands. He looked exhausted in the way only people carrying too much life on too little sleep do. His hair was tied back loosely, and the sleeves of his plain shirt were rolled up as if he had rushed there from another task. His name badge read Nathan. Elena had never seen him before. Before she could step inside, laughter burst from the room. It wasn't warm laughter. It was the sharp, cutting kind that makes a person feel smaller. One executive leaned back in his chair and pointed toward Nathan's lunch container sitting near the edge of the table, the kind of homemade meal packed in a plastic box because buying lunch every day wasn't an option. Another wrinkled his nose and asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, whether the company was now hiring people who brought charity case leftovers into executive spaces. A woman near the projector covered her mouth while smiling, and someone else muttered that single fathers always had an excuse for being late, tired, or distracted, as if parenthood and poverty were moral failures instead of battles fought in silence. Then came the words that stopped Elena cold. One of them said, Nathan should be grateful he even has a job because people like him are replaceable. And if he can't keep his personal problems out of the office, maybe he doesn't belong here at all. Elena stood motionless in the hallway, rainwater still dripping from her jacket cuffs, her hands tightening around the cardboard box until the edges bent. She looked at Nathan. Nathan didn't defend himself. He didn't break down. He simply lowered his eyes and kept placing napkins beside each meal with the steady hands of someone who had learned long ago that humiliation was easier to survive if you stayed quiet and finished the task. But Elena saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened, in the tiny pause before he reached for the next container, in the way he swallowed hard, as though forcing pain back down where no one could see it. It reminded Elena of her own mother, pretending not to hear cruel comments from office workers while she emptied their trash cans at midnight. What Elena learned over the next hour shattered her even more. She quietly asked a janitor about Nathan and discovered he wasn't part of catering at all. He worked downstairs in account support, had picked up the lunch order because the office assistant called in sick, and had been covering extra duties for months without complaint. He was raising a 6-year-old son alone after his wife died in a construction accident 2 years earlier. Since then, he had been working every hour he could, taking buses across the city, leaving before sunrise and returning after dark, trying to keep rent paid and his son in school. He had turned down sympathy from everyone, because sympathy didn't buy medicine, school shoes, or groceries. What he needed was stability, and this job, despite the humiliation, was the only thing standing between his child and disaster. Elena didn't reveal herself that day. Instead, she spent the next week watching. She reviewed attendance logs, overtime records, internal emails, and complaints that had been buried by middle management. She learned that Nathan had been passed over for a promotion he was qualified for because one supervisor had written that his home situation made him unreliable. She found messages mocking his requests for schedule flexibility flexibility when his son was sick. She discovered that the same executives who preached leadership at public conferences had built a private culture of cruelty inside glass meeting rooms, where struggling employees became entertainment over catered lunches and expensive coffee. The following Friday, Elena called an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium. Every executive from the 12th floor sat in the front row, confident and polished, expecting another quarterly update. Nathan slipped into the back, hoping not to be noticed. When Elena walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. Then the giant screen behind her lit up, not with sales numbers, but with a security still from the conference room. A delivery driver standing outside the door, holding 2 food boxes, listening. The color drained from several faces in the front row before Elena said a single word. She spoke slowly, not with anger at first, but with disappointment so deep it seemed to settle over the room like a weight. She told them about the company she had wanted to build, and the mother who had taught her that dignity costs nothing to give but means everything to the person receiving it. Then she described exactly what she had heard in that room: the laughter, the mockery, the contempt for a man who was doing everything in his power to survive. She said that a company's character is not measured by profits, but by how it treats the people with the least power in the room. And then she did something no one expected. She asked Nathan to come to the stage. Nathan walked forward trembling, clearly terrified, probably certain he was about to be exposed in some way that would make everything worse. Instead, Elena stepped down from the stage, met him halfway, and handed him the microphone only so she could say into her own, for the whole room to hear, that the bravest person in the building was not a vice president, not a board member, and not the CEO. It was a father who had been carrying grief, bills, exhaustion, and responsibility without ever allowing his pain to become an excuse for giving up. She announced that Nathan was being promoted to operations coordinator, with a major salary increase, full child care support through the company, and a hardship grant to help stabilize his family. She also announced a zero-tolerance policy for harassment, immediate terminations for the executives involved, and a new employee advocacy office reporting directly to her. Nathan broke down then, not the dramatic kind of breakdown people perform for attention, but the quiet collapse of someone who had been strong for too long. He covered his face and cried into his hands while the room sat in stunned silence. Elena put a respectful hand on his shoulder and told him he never should have had to earn basic respect by suffering in silence. In that moment, something changed in the room. People looked at Nathan differently, not as a burden, not as gossip, not as background noise, but as a human being whose invisible battle had finally been seen. Months later, the culture at Sloane Digital had changed in ways quarterly reports could never measure. Complaints dropped, employee retention improved, managers were trained to lead with accountability and empathy. Nathan moved into a safer apartment. His son started smiling again, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that was more than survival. Elena often thought back to that rainy morning and the sound of laughter behind the conference room door. It had shocked her, yes, but it had also reminded her that the real test of leadership isn't what happens on stage, in interviews, or inside polished annual reports. It happens in the unseen moments when someone vulnerable walks into a room and everyone else decides whether to make their burden lighter or heavier. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something special. Please comment the word kindness below if you believe no single parent should ever be shamed for doing their best. And if this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that compassion can change the course of someone's life, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who still believes in humanity, and subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is refuse to become the kind of world that laughs at people who are already carrying more than enough.